The train from Barcelona to Zaragoza carried Peter through the heart of Aragon, a landscape of rolling hills and ancient towns that seemed unchanged since medieval times. For the first time since arriving in Spain, he was truly alone. No Klaus to provide historical context. No mysterious guides appearing at convenient moments. No one but himself to make decisions about where his ancestral trail would lead him next. The solitude was both liberating and terrifying. Without Klaus's academic expertise, Peter would have to rely on his own research skills and the documents he had gathered in Barcelona. Elena Moncada's papers had mentioned Zaragoza specifically, describing it as a silent sanctuary, where the Mateus family had established one of their most important safe houses during the late 15th century. As the train approached Zaragoza, Peter could see the distinctive silhouette of the Basilica del Pilar rising above the Ebro River, its Baroque towers and colorful tile domes creating one of Spain's most recognizable skylines. But what struck him as unusual, even from a distance, was the complete silence that seemed to emanate from the city's many church towers. Zaragoza was a city of churches. Dozens of bell towers dotted the skyline, from Gothic cathedrals to Baroque basilicas to simple parish churches. Yet as Peter walked from the train station toward the historic center, he realized that he hadn't heard a single church bell since arriving. The silence was so complete that it felt almost oppressive, as if the entire city was holding its breath. His hotel was a converted palace near the Cathedral of the Savior, in the heart of the old city. The desk clerk, a friendly young woman named Pilar, welcomed him in excellent English and offered recommendations for local attractions and restaurants. "Tell me," Peter asked as he registered, "I noticed something unusual about the city. Are the church bells broken? I haven't heard any since I arrived." Pilar's expression shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. "Ah, you've noticed the silence. It's one of Zaragoza's most famous mysteries. The bells of our major churches haven't rung for over 500 years. 500 years? Peter felt his pulse quicken. Since when exactly? Since 1487, according to the city records. One day they simply stopped ringing, all of them at once. The official explanation is that there was some kind of technical problem with the bell mechanisms, but... Pilar lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. Local legend says they were silenced by a curse. That something happened in the old monastery outside the city. Something so terrible that the bells refused to ring again. Peter spent his first evening in Zaragoza walking through the old city, observing the bell towers that rose above him in complete silence. The absence of bells created an eerie atmosphere, especially at sunset when most Spanish cities would normally be filled with the sound of church chimes marking the evening hours. At a small restaurant near the Plaza del Pilar, Peter struck up a conversation with the owner, an elderly man named Miguel who claimed his family had lived in Zaragoza for generations. "The silent bells," Miguel said when Peter mentioned his curiosity about the phenomenon. "My grandfather used to tell stories about the last day they rang. He said it was during the festival of San Vicente Martir, January 22nd, 1487. The bells were ringing for the morning mass when suddenly, all at once, they went silent." "All at once?" Peter asked. "That seems impossible unless someone deliberately stopped them." Miguel nodded knowingly. "That's what some people believe, that it wasn't a curse or a technical failure, but a deliberate act. But why anyone would silence an entire city's bells, and how they managed to do it simultaneously?" He shrugged. Peter pulled out his phone and showed Miguel a photograph of one of the Portuguese documents from Barcelona. "Have you ever seen symbols like these in any local historical records?" Miguel examined the image carefully, then called over his wife, Carmen, who had been listening to their conversation from behind the bar. "These symbols," Carmen said after studying the photograph, "they look similar to markings we've seen in the old monastery, the Monasterio de Santa Engracia, outside the city. It was abandoned not long after the bells fell silent." "Is it possible to visit this monastery?" Peter asked. Miguel and Carmen exchanged glances. "It's on private land now," Miguel replied carefully, "but there are hiking trails that pass near the ruins. If someone were interested in historical research," Carmen wrote down directions on a napkin and handed it to Peter. "Be careful if you go there," she warned. "The current landowner doesn't welcome visitors, and the ruins can be dangerous." That night, in his hotel room, Peter compared the directions Carmen had given him with the maps he had acquired in Barcelona. The location of the abandoned monastery corresponded exactly with a site marked on Isabella's secret map, a place labeled Sanctuary of the Silent Guardians. The next morning, Peter visited Zaragoza's main historical archive, hoping to find official records that might explain the simultaneous silencing of the city's bells. The archivist, a scholarly woman named Dr. Rosa Martinez, was helpful but puzzled by his specific research interest. The bell incident of 1487 is one of our most documented mysteries, Dr. Martinez explained as she retrieved several boxes of historical materials. "We have extensive records from the city council meetings, church registers, and even personal diaries from that period." Peter spent hours reviewing the documents, most of which were written in medieval Spanish that challenged his language skills. But gradually, a pattern emerged that confirmed his growing suspicions about his family's involvement. "Look at this," he said, showing Dr. Martinez a city council record from late January 1487. It mentions a group of Portuguese merchants who had been conducting business with local monasteries for several months before the bell incident. Dr. Martinez examined the document more carefully. "Yes, and here's something interesting. They weren't just any Portuguese merchants. They were specifically dealing in sacred artifacts and manuscript preservation. That was unusual for Portuguese traders, who normally focused on maritime goods." Another document caught Peter's attention. A letter from the abbot of the Monasterio de Santa Engracia to the Bishop of Zaragoza, dated 3 days before the bells fell silent. The letter mentioned grave concerns about the security of our most precious holdings and requested permission to implement emergency preservation measures. Dr. Martinez, what would constitute emergency preservation measures in a 15th century monastery? Typically, it would mean moving valuable manuscripts and artifacts to secure locations, often with the help of trusted merchants who had experience in such matters, she replied. But the timing suggests that whatever they were preserving was considered extremely urgent. The most revealing document was a financial record showing substantial payments made by the monastery to Mateus de Porto and Associates for discretionary services rendered during the period of silence. The payment was dated February 15, 1487, nearly 3 weeks after the bells had stopped ringing. Peter realized that the bell incident wasn't a mystery or a curse. It was a deliberate operation orchestrated by his Portuguese ancestors as cover for moving valuable assets out of the monastery. What do you think Peter's ancestors were really doing in that monastery? And why did they need to silence an entire city's bells to accomplish it? Share your theories in the comments. Dr. Martinez helped Peter locate additional documents that painted a clearer picture of what had happened in early 1487. Political tensions between Aragon and Castile were rising, and several monasteries throughout the region had been forced to relocate their most valuable holdings to prevent them from being seized by royal agents. The Monasterio de Santa Engracia was particularly wealthy, Dr. Martinez explained. It housed one of the most important manuscript collections in northern Spain, including scientific treatises, philosophical works, and what some records describe as charts of unknown lands. Charts of unknown lands? Peter's interest sharpened. From Portuguese exploration? Possibly. The monastery had strong connections to Portuguese scholarly networks, and this was during the height of the Age of Exploration. Such charts would have been extraordinarily valuable. A personal diary from a local nobleman provided the final piece of the puzzle. The nobleman described waking up on the morning of January 22nd to complete silence, then noticing unusual activity around the monastery throughout the following week, wagons arriving and departing at night, groups of men working by torchlight, and finally the complete abandonment of the facility. Your ancestors, Dr. Martinez concluded after reviewing all the evidence, appear to have orchestrated one of the most sophisticated historical preservation operations on record. They used the mystery and fear created by the silent bells to keep curious locals away, while they safely relocated an entire monastery's collection. Peter felt a mixture of pride and apprehension as he realized the scope of his family's activities. The Mateus family weren't just merchants or even cultural preservationists. They were master strategists who could manipulate entire cities to achieve their goals. But the documents also raised troubling questions. If the monastery's collection had been relocated in 1487, where had it been taken? And why were there no records of what had happened to these valuable manuscripts and artifacts? The answer, Peter suspected, lay in the ruins of the Monasterio de Santa Engracia itself. Peter rented a small car and followed Carmen's directions to the abandoned monastery, driving through countryside that looked much as it would have 5 centuries ago. The ruins were located on a hillside about 15 kilometers outside Zaragoza, surrounded by vineyards and olive groves that belonged to a private estate. The current landowners' no trespassing signs were prominently displayed, but Peter noticed that the hiking trail Carmen had mentioned did indeed provide access to the area around the monastery without technically entering private property. The ruins themselves were more extensive than Peter had expected. What remained of the Monasterio de Santa Engracia suggested it had been a large and prosperous institution, with multiple buildings, courtyards, and what appeared to have been an impressive library or scriptorium. Peter spent nearly an hour exploring the accessible areas of the ruins, photographing architectural details, and searching for any symbols or markings that might correspond to the Portuguese documents he carried. Most of the walls had been weathered by centuries of Spanish sun and rain, but in one sheltered courtyard, he found what he was looking for. Carved into the stones around what had once been a doorway were symbols that matched exactly those he had seen on the documents from Toledo, Granada, and Barcelona. But these carvings included additional elements, arrows and directional markers that appeared to form a kind of map. Following the carved directions, Peter discovered that they led to what had once been the monastery's wine cellar. The entrance was partially collapsed, but there was enough space for a person to squeeze through if they were willing to risk the unstable stones. Inside the cellar, Peter found evidence that the space had been used for more than storing wine. The walls were lined with niches that could have held manuscripts or artifacts, and there were clear signs that heavy objects had been moved through the space relatively recently, within the last few decades rather than centuries. But the most significant discovery was a modern metal lockbox hidden behind loose stones in one of the niches. The box was secured with a combination lock that looked like it had been installed within the last 20 or 30 years. Peter stared at the modern lockbox with growing unease. Someone had been using this abandoned monastery much more recently than the 15th century, and they had been storing something valuable enough to require a secure container. After examining the lock more carefully, Peter realized it was a standard 4-digit combination. Given his family's consistent use of significant dates, he decided to try 1487, the year the bells had been silenced. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, Peter found documents that made him question everything he thought he understood about his family's historical preservation network. The papers were recent, some dated within the last 5 years, and they were written in English, German, and Portuguese. The documents revealed that the historical preservation network, established by his Portuguese ancestors, was still operational. Not as a quaint family tradition or academic exercise, but as a sophisticated international organization involved in moving valuable assets across borders, protecting politically sensitive information, and maintaining financial networks that operated outside normal banking systems. Peter found correspondence referring to client accounts managed since 1487, financial statements showing millions of euros in assets, and what appeared to be coded communications between members of families whose names he recognized from his research, including Weber, Moncada, and several others. But the most shocking discovery was a recent report addressed to P. Matthews, final inheritor, and dated just 3 months ago. The report detailed his activities in Chicago, his decision to leave the United States, and projections about his likely travel patterns in Spain. Subject has extensive experience in information brokerage and international asset movement, the report stated. Skills consistent with family tradition. Recommend activation of inheritance protocols upon confirmation of identity and commitment. Peter realized that his entire Spanish adventure had been orchestrated from the beginning, not by Klaus alone, but by a network of families and organizations that had been monitoring him for years, waiting for the right moment to bring him into their operation. A sound from outside the cellar interrupted his reading. Footsteps, multiple people, approaching the monastery ruins. Peter quickly photographed the most important documents and returned them to the lockbox, then looked for alternative exits from the cellar. The footsteps were getting closer, and voices, speaking in accented English, suggested that whoever was approaching knew exactly where to find him. Thank you for staying with us through these incredible revelations. Peter has discovered that his family's historical preservation network is still very much alive and operating in the modern world. But who's coming for him at the monastery? And what do they want? Peter found a narrow passage at the back of the wine cellar that appeared to connect to the monastery's original drainage system. The passage was cramped and partially blocked by debris, but it offered a way out that wouldn't require him to confront whoever was approaching the main ruins. As he crawled through the narrow tunnel, Peter could hear voices from above becoming clearer. One voice he recognized with a chill Klaus Weber, speaking in rapid German to at least 2 other people. "Should be in the cellar by now," Klaus was saying in English. "The activation protocols indicate he would follow the historical progression we established." Another voice, with a British accent, replied, "And if he's not ready to cooperate voluntarily, then we proceed with alternative measures," Klaus answered coldly. "The network has been patient for 5 centuries. We can't allow personal sentimentality to compromise the operation now." Peter emerged from the drainage tunnel about 50 meters from the main monastery ruins, hidden by olive trees that provided cover while he made his way back toward his rental car. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of Klaus and his associates searching the cellar, discovering the lockbox he had just examined. As Peter drove back toward Zaragoza, his mind raced to process what he had learned. The documents in the monastery had mentioned La Rioja as the location of the next major asset cache, describing a vineyard sanctuary that had been established using proceeds from the Zaragoza operation in 1487. But more importantly, the modern documents had made it clear that Peter was now considered either a valuable recruit or a dangerous liability by the network his ancestors had created. His choice to abandon Klaus in Barcelona had apparently triggered some kind of escalation protocol. Peter realized he needed to stay ahead of Klaus and his associates while also deciding whether he wanted to claim his inheritance in this ancient network or find a way to escape from it entirely. Back in Zaragoza, Peter quickly packed his belongings and checked out of his hotel, paying in cash and providing false information about his next destination. The documents from the monastery had been specific about the location in La Rioja, a vineyard called Bodega de los Secretos near the town of Haro, established in the late 15th century and still operating as a winery. As he prepared to leave the city, Peter took one last walk through the historic center, passing the silent bell towers that had started his investigation. Now he understood that the bells hadn't been cursed or broken. They had been deliberately silenced by his ancestors as part of an elaborate deception designed to facilitate one of history's most successful asset protection operations. The silence that had mystified Zaragoza for over 500 years was actually a monument to the Mateus family's strategic brilliance. But it was also a warning about the lengths they were willing to go to protect their secrets. Peter's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The vineyard is expecting you, Peter. Some traditions are too important to abandon. Your ancestors understood duty. We hope you do as well." As Peter drove northwest toward La Rioja, he found himself at a crossroads that went beyond simple geography. He could continue following the trail his ancestors had left, potentially claiming access to centuries of accumulated wealth and power, but also accepting responsibility for activities that operated in moral gray areas and attracted dangerous attention. Or he could try to disappear entirely, abandoning his family legacy and finding a way to start over without the burden of 5 centuries of hidden history. But as the vineyards of La Rioja appeared on the horizon, Peter realized that the choice might not be entirely his to make. The network his ancestors had created was powerful, sophisticated, and had been planning for his involvement for decades. Walking away might not be as simple as buying a plane ticket back to Chicago. The silent bells of Zaragoza had revealed more than just historical mysteries. They had shown Peter that his family's legacy involved manipulating entire cities, creating elaborate deceptions, and maintaining secrets that could reshape international finance and cultural preservation. Now he had to decide whether he was ready to become the next guardian of those secrets, or whether he would find a way to break the chain of inheritance that stretched back over 500 years. As his car wound through the rolling hills of La Rioja, surrounded by vineyards that might hold the answers to all his questions, Peter Matthews prepared for what could be the most important decision of his life. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible revelation in Zaragoza. The silent bells weren't cursed or broken. They were silenced by Peter's brilliant ancestors as part of an elaborate 500-year deception. But now Peter has discovered that the Historical Preservation Network is still very much alive and operating in the modern world, with Klaus and his associates tracking his every move. The documents at the monastery revealed that Peter's entire journey has been orchestrated to bring him into a sophisticated international operation. The choice facing Peter is no longer just about discovering his family history. It's about whether he's willing to become part of a network that has been manipulating events for centuries. And the mysterious vineyard in La Rioja may hold the final answers he needs to make that decision. What do you think Peter should do? Join the network that his ancestors created, or find a way to escape from centuries of family obligation? And what secrets could an ancient vineyard be hiding in the wine region of La Rioja? Don't miss the next episode, The Lost Vineyard of La Rioja, where Peter will discover that some family legacies come with prices that go far beyond money and power. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of Peter's incredible journey through Spain's hidden history. The most crucial decisions of his life are just ahead.